Hello friends, today I want to give this talk. The topic is mankind and nature's teachers. I found myself several years ago asking the big questions of life. Where did we come from? Where are we going? What the hell are we? What is the human being? And I would ask the spiritual people, I'd ask the scientists, the philosophers, and I'd get bits of truth from each, but I wasn't getting the full answer I needed. I needed an experience to show me who we were, to show me God. Rosh Lako once said, happiness is in the taste. And I felt I needed to have an experience to know the truth. I then got a message from the universe that said to me, the truth you will find in the psychedelic. I then started doing my research in this area and made a decision that I wanted to try LSD. I serendipitously found some LSD one day, went to the forest in late 2012. At the time, there was a lot of talk about the world ending at the end of 2012. That day my world did end. I had a life-changing experience which changed my whole worldview of what was possible for a human being to experience. Before then and since then, I've been a keen traveller. I've been on all the continents. I've done lots of great human experiences, but the experience that I had in the psychedelic visions and experience was something way above anything else I could even imagine possible, and something that I know that many people also don't know much about. So I feel it's my duty now to share what I've learned from this experience. I've also done a lot of research on the history of these things, where they are now and where they could potentially take the human being and the human race into our future. I'd like to share those thoughts with you today. Now, the human brain produces many chemicals. These chemicals could be considered to be drugs. We have things like dopamine and serotonin and adrenaline, to name a few of the neurotransmitters. These are things that control your mood, your sleep patterns, your appetite. What you have in psychedelic plants and mushrooms are chemicals that mirror the chemicals that we already produce endogenously in our brains. Some of them are exactly the same, as in DMT, dimethyltryptamine. I'll be coming to that one later. But you have a unique situation where these plants actually contain chemicals that your brain knows how to assimilate, knows where to put, and when they go into your brain, they change your perception and give you the visionary experience. Many of these psychedelics work on the serotonin receptors. Serotonin is a very interesting neurotransmitter because it actually mirrors very closely a few of the very popular psychedelics, like DMT and like psilocybin, which is the active chemical in the magic mushroom. When you ingest these chemicals, they go into the same neurotransmitter receptors in your brain. They kick out the serotonin temporarily, plug into the serotonin receptors, and deliver the psychedelic experience. They do this very non-toxically, as your brain knows what to do with these chemicals. So, having had this amazing experience, I then started looking throughout other cultures and looking at where these chemicals had been used by other cultures throughout history, and it led me to look at much ancient art. as that is where much information has been saved. I'm going to show some art from different cultures which show me that these people have also had the psychedelic experience. You have this sort of oriental art which again shows spirits and gods. What's interesting is that these art forms come from all over the world, from very separate, disconnected cultures, but all seem to have seen the same thing and interpret them in their own way. This sort of Arabic art is something you can see shows that somebody who made that clearly has had some visions. The Tibetans create these mandalas which, under the influence of the mushrooms themselves and other psychedelics, three-dimensionalize into temples where you can actually go into those places and actually meet spirit beings, meet up with other human beings who you're also having the experience with. High technology that they were dealing with at the time. And of course, even in the Christian faith, you have the stained glass windows, which for me show quite clearly the visionary experience behind that particular religious order. Totem poles are interesting because these are something I'd never really thought of as being particularly spiritual. But during my first psilocybin mushroom experience, I got a very clear vision of a desert with a huge living totem pole in the middle with living animal heads, it seemed, all stacked on top of each other. Very surprising at the time, of course. But I then realized that the people who made totem poles clearly got that same vision and made what they saw in the light. I then looked into the Bible. Where is the evidence of potential visionary plant use in the Bible? There's a few quite poignant stories in there. One is the story of Adam and Eve. The story says something like, and I slightly paraphrase, if they eat of the fruit of the garden, they will know themselves to be gods like us. This is what the God character says. The serpent character says, eat of the tree, know yourself. They did eat of the tree, Adam and Eve, and their eyes were open. What the exact fruit of the Garden of Eden was, we'll never quite know. There is art that we can see here that would say that the fruit of the Garden of Eden was actually a type of mushroom. The fly agaric, Amanita muscaria, red and white mushroom. This is what was believed by the Gnostic faith, who were a type of Christian who would use these particular plants and mushrooms to have the visionary experience themselves. The priesthoods weren't too keen on the Gnostics because who needs a priest if you're having a direct experience with God yourself by eating these mushrooms? So these people were demonized and persecuted, burned at the stake, many of them, and much of their knowledge was lost. But some of their art did remain, and there is much art that actually depicts biblical scenes with mushrooms and opium and other plants being the focal points of connection between mankind and God. You also look at the story of the burning bush, Moses. We have a bush that was burning and Moses went up and had an experience with God. Might that be actually hinting that whatever Moses was inhaling through that bush was some sort of psychoactive? Possible. We then have Christmas. Now this Christmas story originated in Russia, in the Siberian area. In that area you have many pine trees growing. The pine tree has a symbiotic relationship with the fly agaric, red and white spotted magic mushroom. The mushroom and the pine tree grow together symbiotically, and they share nutrients with each other. You would have a shaman who would come along and pick those mushrooms and put them on the trees, on the actual pine trees, to keep them out of the reach of the reindeers who would also want to eat those mushrooms. Again, lending to the idea of the flying reindeers. This shaman character, who became Santa Claus, would then take those mushrooms and give them out to the people in the area as gifts. And you can see how that would then become the Christmas story. These mushrooms are seen throughout European culture, and they are very much linked with the worlds of the gnomes and the elves and the hobbits and the fairies. And some would say if you eat the right amount of Amanita muscaria mushrooms and go down to the forest, you might well meet some of these beings, or some of the beings that Alice met when she travelled down that rabbit hole. Witches are an interesting phenomenon. A witch is very much a demonized term in our current society. But what is a witch? A witch originally was a person who had access and knowledge of the plants and the actual power within the plants, the healing properties of the plants, the visionary properties of the plants. They would have their cauldron and they would mix all the plants that they knew would do different things for different people. The witch had the access to the visionary experience through the plants, the direct access, without the need of any sorts of priesthoods. Again, when the priesthoods came to power, the witches, like the Gnostics, were demonized, and they were turned from being the vision of a normal, beautiful woman into the old, ugly, demonic-looking hag. This image has stayed with us as human beings and scared many people away from seeking the knowledge and information that is in the plants, not wanting to be labelled as a witch. This is something that has been deeply entrenched in the human being, a fear of getting to know for yourself, a fear of eating the fruits of the tree of knowledge yourself. But by eating of the fruits yourself, you will personally have the knowledge and information you need to become more than just the human being you currently are today. In Indian culture, you have the holy cow. The cow is a very revered animal in that Indian culture. Why is the cow so special? Well, on the cow's dung grows some very strong psilocybin mushrooms. And if you eat enough of those mushrooms, you may well meet Shiva and Vishnu and Kali and these sorts of characters. Again, the people who create this sort of art clearly were having some sort of visionary experience. And in Cambodia, you have Angkor Wat, huge temples with many carvings of heads, and you have carvings of pine trees. Again, going back to what we said earlier on, the pine tree has a symbiotic relationship with the mushroom, and in this particular area in Cambodia is known to grow some very strong psilocybin mushrooms also. And when you have the psychedelic experience, it is not uncommon to see heads of people joined together, heads of animals joined together. So it seems very obvious that the people who created those temples, who had the vision to create those temples, were finding the information to do so in this visionary experience. The stone figures on Easter Island. The stone to create those figures is said not to actually be located where the actual figures are situated. To get the stone from where they're actually situated to where they currently are would have taken a superhuman effort. It is said that within the knowledge of the mushrooms, you can actually find the information on how to move and levitate huge rocks. which would also explain how the pyramids were made. I'll come to them in a little while. But when you look at the heads of the figures on Easter Island, the nose and the brow look very much like mushrooms. And it is said that this may well be the secret behind the mystery of these big Easter Island figures. So I wanted to speak a little bit about some of the popular psychedelics that are used today. Ayahuasca. Now, ayahuasca is a brew containing a vine and some leaves. The vine contains DMT. DMT is a very, very powerful psychedelic. If you eat something that has DMT in it though, your stomach will dissolve the DMT and stop it from getting into your blood and creating a psychedelic experience. Many plants have traces of DMT in them, and if we were to actually have a psychedelic experience every time we had contact with DMT, we'd be spending our whole lives tripping out. The leaves of the brew contain an inhibitor which stops your stomach dissolving the DMT, allowing the DMT to cross over into your blood and create a psychedelic experience. I've had several experiences with ayahuasca and had amazing out of this world, off world experiences. Alien worlds, animal worlds are all available to you through this experience. And the sort of things you see in this picture are possible to be seen, and far, far more. LSD. LSD was created by Albert Hofmann, a chemist, in the 1930s. It was created because they were experimenting with ergot, which is a fungus that grows on a particular type of rye. This was being experimented with because there was evidence in history of ergot being used to help women with their menstrual issues. And he wanted to see if he could use it in helping to reduce pain in childbirth and just with general women's gynecological problems. He created LSD without meaning to. He then one day got a drop of this on his skin and had a psychedelic experience. He was very amazed at this experience, and it was sent out to many doctors and psychiatrists around the world to see what they could do with it. It then got out of the laboratories and into the youth culture, which then brought on the psychedelic hippie phase of the 1960s and 70s. But great experience is to be had. I've personally had several experiences with LSD, and it has shown me some very amazing things. We also have peyote, which is a psychedelic that comes from a cactus used by the Native American Indians, and giving them access to the psychedelic experience, the great spirits, the great animal spirits that they were in tune with. You also have toads that excrete a type of DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, which is harmful to the animals that they are prey to. But to us human beings, if you take this 5-MeO-DMT, there is a very, very strong psychedelic experience to be had. I personally have also had this experience, which was absolutely mind-blowing, off-world, out of this world, out of this mind. Several other psychedelics that I've still got a lot to do. I've not had iboga, which is done in West Africa. We also have Salvia divinorum, which is a type of sage plant grown in Central America, which again can bring on some very strong psychedelic states. So how do the psychedelics work? What are they doing? How do they bring on this visual experience in space that looks like it's empty space before you take this particular substance. And then you take the substance and all of a sudden all this stuff's going on in this empty space. How does that happen? As human beings, when we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, we only see a very small amount of what is happening on that spectrum between the ultraviolet and infrared range. We know there's a lot more going on the electromagnetic spectrum. We know there are radio waves and cosmic waves and microwaves, radar waves, gamma rays, cosmic rays, but we can't see them. But we know they're there because we use them. We use them to do radios, we use microwaves to cook food. We know when we change the channel on our remote control, we are using one of those beams to actually communicate with the box. But we know there's lots going on we can't see. We can't see the internet, but we know it's there, we use it. What I believe these psychedelics allow us to do is to move our perception from our normal range of sight into places that we can't see on the electromagnetic spectrum. And this is also what was going on in the pyramids and the temples of the world. See, in these pyramids, there were no windows. People would go into these places for weeks and months. And when you deprive yourself of natural light for a period of time, the brain starts to produce different chemicals. It starts to produce melatonin. It starts to produce pinealine. Eventually, it starts to produce very pure DMT. So a part of answering the question of what are we as human beings is we have to understand that each and every one of us has 3 eyes. We have these 2 eyes that look out into the world, but we also have a 3rd eye. We all know we have a 3rd eye because we know we can lay in a bed at night, close these 2 eyes in a dark room, and then have a bright world open to us. It's what we call dreams. And we're kind of taught that dreams aren't real, they're just dreams. But in thinking our dreams are not real, we are denying our own life experience. Each and every one of us has had dreams. I personally dream quite vividly every night. Part of living your full potential and understanding your full potential is learning how to consciously see through your 3rd eye. Because in a dream, you're looking through your 3rd eye, you're seeing through your 3rd eye, but you're not consciously doing it. Psychedelics give you the ability to see consciously through your 3rd eye. And if you want to realize your full potential, then this is something that is worth learning how to do. And again, there is a lot of evidence throughout different cultures of the world that they all seem to acknowledge a 3rd eye. It is said that we have a massive burst of DMT come through our bodies at the moment of birth, taking us from whatever place we were in before being born into this world. It is also said we have a massive rush of DMT at the moment of our death, taking us from this world to the next stages. What people would do is go deeply into these death places while they are alive, in these temples, in these pyramids, and in those states they would see what they would then draw onto the walls, which has become the hieroglyphics. They would see those beings that they drew in hieroglyphics, those animal-headed, human-bodied beings, those magical godlike beings. These things are all available in the visionary experience. I myself had a dark room experience once, but unfortunately it was only for 5 days. But in that time I could definitely see what started out as being pitch darkness turn into a very bright, colourful scene. And the boundary between being asleep and awake became thinner and thinner by the day. Dreams became very, very vivid and very real. So I can imagine if I had done that for 14 days, which is as long as it's supposed to take to start to produce the very pure DMT, and how interesting that experience may have been. These spirit beings that I mentioned you see in these visionary states, there are many examples throughout the tribal cultures of the world that they have also had contact with these spiritual beings and mimicked what these spiritual beings look like in their tribal outfits. Hence why you have the Dogon tribe who would dress in this sort of way. Again, you'd have the Native Americans dressing in their own ways to mimic the beings that they saw when they took their mushrooms and peyote and things like that. And also you get the tribes from the Australian and Asian places who also would mimic the beings that they saw. I have seen tribal beings myself once in a ayahuasca vision. I found myself with several African tribal characters seeming to be dancing around me. And you can see some of them would have tattoos. Some of them would have big hooped rings in their lips and noses. And you realize that the people who do these things were also, again, seeing these same beings, revered those beings and made themselves look like these beings. And this happened in all the cultures, like I say, from the Australians to the Africans to the Americas, all around the world, where these plants were actually not demonized and actually utilized properly as they were meant to and respected as they're meant to, and the information in the plants actually revered. These cultures learned how to live with the planet and with the animals, and we're doing a far better job of that than what we are doing. We are now living a society who are on a prodigal journey. We have forgotten this knowledge that comes directly from the planet itself. And when you forget this knowledge, you build cities and you become capitalists, and you decide the world is there to be raped and pillaged, and you'll drain all the resources from the planet, which is what we're basically doing in this society. But the planet itself is responding to that now. The planet itself is governed by a higher mind. We ourselves are all parts of that higher mind. We are the higher mind experiencing itself subjectively as one individual human being. But we are actually all part of that higher mind. It's like we are all radio receivers and we are all logged into the actual radio broadcasts. We think we are the individuals who are having this individual experience, but there is a overall broadcaster. The psychedelic experience allows you to see for a little while maybe from the perspective of the broadcaster, the overmind. And this is when people say everything was one. This is what we're getting at when we say that, because I've had that experience myself of feeling, wow, everything is one, everything makes sense. Everything that human beings can do, from the greatest good to the most heinous evil, is all a part of the spectrum of experience available in this overmind. And we just tune into different parts of that as human beings. But the overmind can also, if it feels the planet itself is under threat, it can send a message out, a group broadcast, if you like, to many human beings. And this is what's happening now. Today you're seeing many people turning vegan and doing yoga, and many people are turning now to these visionary plants. The same message that I got that said turn to these plants for knowledge and information, there are people now all over the world getting that same message from the overmind. And this is why many people are going down to the Amazon to drink ayahuasca, and people are seeking out the knowledge from the mushrooms, and we are now on the hero's journey from forgetting who we were to remembering who we are. And we'll do that when we re-establish our relationship with these plants, with the mushrooms, with the planet itself, with the overmind, understand that we are gods, each and every one of us. We are God itself, experiencing itself subjectively as one human being. In the moment of death, you'll see your body and you'll see the world around it, the ground beneath your feet, the sky above you, and you will see all of these things from a other perspective. This whole scene, the body and the world around it, will move away from you, and you will see yourself being something wondrously neither of them, but greater than all of them. I've done a lot of research on the end of life experience, what happens to people in death, what people say happens to them at the end of their lives. And I feel there are huge parallels with the psychedelic experience. The psychedelic experience is there to allow you to practice dying. Find death before death finds you. If you can do that, then death will lose its great power over you, the fear that death gives so many of us, the not knowing what's going to happen after you die. The planet did not leave us hanging, having to wait till we die to find out what's going to happen. The planet has given us several ways of going to that death place now, alive and consciously, and coming back with the knowledge from those places. So when we do finally ultimately die, it's not going to be that big a deal. It's something we will do consciously. Find death before death finds you. We are given clues that this is the case, that we are not our bodies or the world around our bodies. Every night we go to sleep, we lie in our beds and we leave our bodies. The part of you that is really you leaves your body in the bed and goes off and lives some sort of other quantum life somewhere else. We call them dreams. But this is a universe giving you a big clue that there is a part of you, a very real part of you that is not your body, that is not the world around your body. So for those people who want to know more and understand more about themselves and their full human potential, the psychedelic plants are there for you. They'll show you the nature of life is not a linear process. It's not such a case that there is a beginning point here and an end point there, and that's birth and that's death. The world seems to work in a fractal pattern. A fractal pattern is everything is happening on different scales, on micro scales up to bigger scales. The same things are happening. I found myself once in an LSD experience looking into a tree, and as I looked at this tree, I was looking in the crevices, and it looked like I was basically looking within the Grand Canyon, huge rocks, and I was looking within huge mountains, and I could see the same thing I was seeing just in this crevice of this tree was the same vision you'd get if you were looking from a helicopter down into the Grand Canyon. I once sat on a beach under the influence of LSD, and I was watching the waves come up and crash down, and the waves would come up in exactly the same shape as a mountain would be. They'd be exactly the same as a mountain. It was like I was watching mountains come up, grow and crash down, but all happening in seconds. What would take thousands of years and millions of years on this planet to happen to actual mountains, the same process was happening on a different scale in this water. Everything mirrors everything at different frequencies. This is what the psychedelic will show you about the fractal nature of reality. I want to speak a little bit about aliens. We're looking to the sky, looking for aliens to come to this planet, wondering if there's anything else out there. What you have to realize is on micro scales, there are animals that are as alien as anything you could possibly imagine could possibly be in outer space. You imagine aliens, wow, they might be able to fly. They might have 8 eyes and 100 legs. They might be green, they might be blue. They may metamorphosize their bodies from one thing to the other. All these things that seem very magical are happening in the animal kingdom. If you take the word animal away and change it to alien, you'll find all the magic you could possibly want to see, but much of it is happening in micro scales. It's happening under the ground. We can't see much of it because we're so busy living our human existences. Yes, the aliens are all around us already. We are already as far out in outer space as we're possibly ever gonna be. We're already living a magical situation, and all this magic is waiting for us, waiting for our senses to sharpen, to see what is right before our eyes. Those things we call animals are aliens that cleverly decided to downsize themselves, make themselves smaller. The benefits of doing that is you use less resources in the planet to survive, and you're less detectable to the big destructive beings like us. So it was actually a clever evolutionary move by many of these beings to downsize themselves to micro scales. Psychedelics have also been responsible for much of the high technology that we enjoy today. Many of the computers, Apple computers, Steve Jobs has made it very clear that using LSD in his development days was very useful for him to develop Apple into the company that it was. Also, many of the Microsoft engineers would use psychedelics, because what you can do with a lot of psychedelics, if you have a problem, you're trying to understand something more, if you take the psychedelic and actually meditate on that problem under the influence, you will be given a stream of information, and you will learn so much more than you would by reading a book. The psychedelic will give you much information. Sometimes so much information that it's hard to even stop and take it in for a little while, because it's just a flood. We're not going to find the truth about who we are in books. No one can tell you the truth. You have to find the experience yourself. If you're called to this experience, not everybody is. And pre-2012, when I started this journey, I wasn't interested in psychedelics. So I understand if other people aren't interested in them, and there is a great life to be had without them, of course. But for those seekers who want to find higher information, really push their humanity and have the bravery, psychedelics can be hugely beneficial to you and show you visions of the future that humankind is going towards. The point of this talk is to just open up the topic to you and hopefully inform you a little bit about these things. So thanks for listening. Peace and love, people.